Shodhanandana Vrajajanaranjanam Shodhanandana Vrajajanaranjanam Munatira Vanachari Munatira Vanachari Jayo Jayo Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Bihari Jayo Giri-varadhari Jayo Giri-varadhari Shodhanandana Vrajajanaranjanam Shodhanandana Vrajajanaranjanam Munatira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Radha Madhava Krishna Mahaprabhu Srila Prabhupada. This morning we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 13, Text 5. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Pratyujjagmuḥ praharṣeṇa. Prāṇaṁ tanva ivāgatam. Abhisaṅgamya vidhi-vat. pariṣvaṅgābhivādanaiḥ. Pratyujjagmuḥ praharṣeṇa. Prāṇaṁ tanva ivāgatam. abhisaṅgamya vidhi-vat. pariṣvaṅgābhivādanaiḥ. Please repeat. Ivāgatam. Vaishnavas. Prati, towards. Ujjagmuḥ, went. Praharṣeṇa, with great delight. Prāṇaṁ, life. Tanya, of the body. Iva, like. Āgatam, returned. Abhisaṅgamya, approaching. Vidhi-vat, in due form. Pariṣvaṅga, embracing. Abhivādanaiḥ, by obeisances. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. With great delight, they all approached him as if life had returned to their bodies. They exchanged obeisances and welcomed each other with embraces. Purport. In the absence of consciousness, the limbs of the body remain inactive. But when consciousness returns, the limbs and senses become active and existence itself becomes delightful. Vidura was so dear to the members of the Kaurava family that his long absence from the palace was comparable to inactivity. All of them were feeling acute separation from Vidura, and therefore his return to the palace was joyful for all. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dhinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopiga Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gorat Vishye Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gora Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So in this shloka we hear how Vidura, after long absence, was received in the palace of the Kurus. If you remember from Bhagavatam and Mahabharata also, that Vidura, he was offended by Duryodhana with the sharp words that pierced his heart. So he left everything, he went on a pilgrimage. In the meanwhile, the Kurukshetra war happened. Most of the Kurus and others were killed. And Vidura is now back. And during this period of separation, the members of the Kuru dynasty present in the palace and Vidura himself, they felt the pain due to natural feelings of separation from the loved ones. And now that feeling of separation is suited, they are now experiencing another emotion, that's a happiness of meeting. After pain comes happiness. So these are the emotions that they are experiencing. So this display of emotions and descriptions of different emotional states are quite common in the scriptures, in the Shastra, in the Bhagavatam, particularly Chaitanya Charitamrita, where different devotees experiencing different spiritual emotions. For example, in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the Jnana Yoga chapter, Krishna says, Katam vina roma harsham dhravata cetasa vinandashru khalaya shudayet bhakti vinashaya. If one's hairs do not stand on end, how can the heart melt? And if the heart does not melt, how can tears of love flow from the eyes? If one does not cry in spiritual happiness, how can one render loving service to the Lord? And without such service, how can the consciousness be purified? So different spiritual emotions and their bodily expressions are described here. And actually crying is a quite common ecstatic display of ecstatic emotion that is experienced at advanced levels of bhakti. Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur in his Chaitanya Bhagavata, he says one very interesting shloka. He says, Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Yoga Dhan, Bhakti E Krishna Nam Smaran Krandan. He says that 3 times he repeats, devotional service, devotional service, devotional service, or Bhakti Yoga is the only treasure. And then he says, Bhakti or devotional service means crying while remembering Krishna's name. Krishna Nam Smaran Krandan. So do we cry when we remember Krishna's name? But this is description of the advanced devotional service. Just by remembering name of Krishna, tears spontaneously come to the eyes. So there are 8 ecstatic transformations called Krishna Bhakti Vikar. First being stamba, being stunned, one becomes stunned. Then sweda, perspiring, romancha, hair stand on end. Then Svarabheda, choking, the voice starts choking. Then Vipatu or Kampa, which is trembling. Vaivarnya, fading of the bodily color. Ashru is weeping. And Pralaya or Murcha, which is devastation, when one feels completely devastated and like dying. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, in the purport to this shloka that I quoted from Chaitanya Bhagavat, he says the devotional service manifests in a heart that has been melted by hearing, chanting, and remembering. Meaning that heart first has to be purified to feel these exalted emotions. If one heart is hardened by false arguments or filled with the desire to control, then the propensity for service does not appear. And then these ecstatic feelings or emotions do not appear in the heart that is hardened by material desires or speculative knowledge. But we cannot judge the real emotions that appear in the heart just on the basis of external display of these emotions, because these external symptoms, they can be imitated, and pseudo-devotees or sahajis, they often imitate these feelings in order to gain some cheap respect of ignorant people. In Chaitanya Bhagavat, again, we have a description of Srila Haridas Thakur, who was the Uttama Bhagavad devotee of the Lord, very advanced devotee who would constantly chant the holy names of Krishna and often display these ecstatic symptoms like crying, trembling, and others. And there is a description when he was in Puglia, there was one snake charmer who was performing his performance in the courtyard of some wealthy man. These snake charmers, they have special mantras that they chant, and before the display they expose themselves to the snake bite of non-poisonous snake, and then they chant these mantras, and by these mantras they become possessed by the Vasuki, the king of the snakes, or Banantashesh. And then in trance they speak what Vasuki Anantashesh is dictating to them. So associates of the snake charmer, they were playing different instruments and drums, karatals, and he was dancing and chanting the mantras in a trance. And during this performance, it happened that Haridas Thakur was passing by, and at that moment, snake charmer, he was singing about the Kalya Dahana pastime, Krishna subduing the serpent Kalya. And just by listening of this pastime, the love in the heart of Haridas Thakur awakened, and he started roaring like a madman, and then he became stunned and fell in front of everybody, and there was no life in him. But then other people surrounded, they started chanting Krishna's name, so he awoke and started jumping and dancing. And during this, the snake charmer, he recognized the exalted stature of the Haridas Thakur, so he just moved to the side and very respectfully stood and watched the display of ecstatic emotions of Haridas Thakur. And after some time, the ecstatic emotions subdued, and Haridas Thakur went on his way. And then the snake charmer, he resumed his performance, his dancing and singing. On the side, there was one brahmana who was smarter, and he thought, well, if this low-born, Muslim-born Haridas could gain such respect of the crowd, of the people, why I, who am a high-born brahmana, cannot do the same? So he pretended that he became stunned, and he fell in front of the snake charmer in the crowd, pretending to be in ecstasy. But snake charmer, inspired by the Lord Ananta from the heart, he took a stick and started beating this brahmana like anything. And the Brahmana starts screaming, and he ran away, calling father, mother. And then people around, they were perplexed, and they approached Snake Charmer and said, "Can you explain us one thing? When the Haridas Thakur fainted, you just stood respectfully there. But when this Brahmana fainted, you started beating him. So why did you do this?" And then Snake Charmer replied to them, being inspired by Lord Ananta from the heart. He said, "Haridas Thakur is exalted devotee of the Lord, and what he displayed is a display of his ecstatic love for Krishna. And this martyr Brahmana, he's a materialistic Brahmana who is envious at Haridas Thakur, and he just wants to gain cheap adoration of ignorant people. That's why I had to teach him a lesson." So in this way, people understood that feeling this exalted emotion in the heart is not a cheap thing, and one cannot imitate it. So the bhakti or devotional service actually is the ocean of ecstatic emotions. It's bhakti rasamrita sindhu, it's the ocean of rasa. And all these emotions described in bhakti rasamrita sindhu, they're spiritual emotions. They're all in relation to Krishna. They're not in relation to this material body and its byproducts. And different spiritual emotions are described by Acharyas and Rupa Goswami specifically. For example, we have a sthayi bhava, which is permanent attachment or emotion. Srila Prabhupada, I think, translates the nectar of devotion as permanent ecstasy. So it's a permanent attachment to Krishna, or rati. It's called rati also. When this rati gains a taste, then it becomes rasa that can be relished. And there are 5 principal forms of sthayi bhava called Shantarati, Dasyarati, Sakyarati, Vatsalarati, and Madhuryarati. And one of these is always dominant as the sthayi bhava in an individual. But then there are other spiritual emotions or bhavas like vibhava, anubhava, and sanchari bhavas. There's a secondary ratis. And then they are mixed with this sthayi bhava, and only when they are mixed with sthayi bhava, then it becomes rasa that can be relished and tasted. So until the heart is purified and real spiritual emotions appear in the heart, all this will just remain a theory for us. So let's go a little back to our present conditioned level, at least in my case, and discuss how emotions play part in our present life. And it's a fact that in everybody's life emotions play some part, and it's often a very significant part, and they can also significantly influence our spiritual life, our practice of devotional service. So it's important to understand it properly. So the very word emotion in English comes from the Latin word emovere, which means to move out. Something is moving out from the heart, and it's become visible externally on the body. So what is that moving? It's energy. Some energy is moving out and becoming visible to everybody to see it. So it's energy that moves us, that stirs us up, that motivates us. Without this energy or without emotion, we cannot do anything. We will have no impetus to do things in life. We'll be just dull like a stone or a wood. And especially when we have some goal that we want to achieve, then in regard to this goal, in relation to this goal, emotions appear in the heart that motivate us to pursue this goal and to achieve it. So the goal becomes important because the emotions are involved in connection to it. So those who don't have any goal, they don't have any emotions, they're bored, depressed, melancholic, everything is difficult for them. Lifeless, basically. Emotionless means lifeless. So where do these different emotions originate? If person is spiritually awake or liberated, then they originate in the soul. If the one is a soul realized, the emotions come directly from the soul, and these emotions are called spiritual emotions. And then these emotions are transferred to the mind and the body and activities, and they become visible. But in the conditioned state, when the soul is still sleeping, the origin of the emotions is the mind or the subtle body, or chitta. Sometimes we call it chitta, which is a part of the subtle body, sometimes translated as the mind, sometimes as the heart. And obviously these emotions that appear in the mind or the chitta, they are material emotions, because the subtle body is also material. So from the mind or the heart, this energy in the form of emotions is transferred to the brain, and then this brain, because mind and brain are somehow interconnected, and then this brain is producing different hormones that influence the body. We all might have had experience when we're angry, and how the anger actually affected our body, or when we experience some other feeling like fear, start trembling, or lust, it all becomes manifest on the gross body if the emotion is strong. In the Bhagavad Gita we have description of Arjuna in the first chapter, when he was standing with the Krishna in front of the army of Kauravas. It's described when he saw all these warriors, friends and relatives described there, he became overwhelmed with the compassion, and he spoke, Siddhami mama ghatrani mukham cha pariṣvaṅgābhivādanaiḥ. He says, my dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up. Mukham cha pariṣvaṅgābhivādanaiḥ. So the limbs are shaking and the mouth is drying up because of the strong feelings that arose in Arjuna's heart. So there is a wide variety of different material emotions. And most of these emotions are negative and stressful, disturbing and distracting, and that's why they become impediment to our spiritual practice. Although there are some so-called positive material emotions, but I'll come to that later. First, let's just make broad classifications of these material emotions. They could be broadly classified in three categories. First category is called raga, or material attachment. Anybody who is materially conditioned, he has material desires in the heart, and they all stem from our desire to enjoy and control this material world, to be controller and enjoyer. And these unlimited desires, unlimited objects of desires, and that's why unlimited material attachments. And they're all born from ahankara, or false ego. Second category of material emotions is fear. So when these attachments, material attachments and desires, when they are threatened, when their fulfillment is threatened, when there is some significant obstacle to fulfilling our material desires and attachments, then fear appears in the heart. We don't know how to overcome that obstacle. to objects of our attachments. And if the obstacle is not so big, is not so significant, and we think that we can somehow fight and cross it over, then anger appears. When our material desires are threatened, but not so strongly, when somebody dares to challenge our desires, and we have courage and strength to fight back, then anger appears, which is third category of material emotions. More or less, all our emotional reactions would come under one of these three categories: raga, attachment, fear, and anger. Lamentation, resentment, greed, lust, all could be classified in one of these three categories. So emotion in Sanskrit is called bhava. This is the closest word to the English word emotion. So all these material emotions or bhavas, they are transformations of the mind. They are man vikar and caused by ahankara. And as I said, they are mostly negative, detrimental. But even if the material emotion is positive, it will not last very long. And once it's gone, again, you feel miserable. So today, it's a sunny day, and I feel great and joy. But tomorrow, clouds come, and it's raining, and I feel again miserable. So jubilation is one such positive material emotions. You feel good, your mood is up. Let's say you are trading on a cryptocurrency market and Bitcoin goes 100% up and you're in ecstasy, you made a lot of money. But then tomorrow it goes 200% down and you are completely miserable again and depressed. So this is the downside of this so-called positive material emotions. And the result of both of them, of both positive and negative material emotion, is that they turn mind away from Krishna. They take it away from Krishna and absorb it into something else, either in material happiness or material distress and misery. And then it's very difficult to practice devotional service with such ups and downs. Lord Krishna, in the 11th canto of Bhagavatam, he says to Uddhava in this regard: Shoka harsha bhaya krodha lobha moha sprihadaya ahankarasya drishyante janma mrityush chanatmana. He says lamentation, shoka, elation, fear, anger, greed, confusion, and hankering, as well as birth and death, are experiences of the false ego and not the pure soul. So all these material emotions, they are experiences of the material ego, ahankara. And they are obstacle to bhakti. And we have to learn how not to be controlled by them if we wish to make spiritual progress. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami, he is quoting one verse from Padma Purana in relation to not being controlled by lamentation and other emotions. He says, quote, "How it is possible for Mukunda to appear in the mind of a person whose mind is afflicted with lamentation, anger, or other emotions?" In other words, Mukunda or Krishna will not appear in the mind that is afflicted by these material emotions as lamentation, anger, fear, and so on and so forth. These emotions are distracting and they are making our practice of devotional service difficult. It's difficult to chant the holy name and concentrate and be attentive if you are overcome by anger, by fear, by greed. Your mind is completely absorbed into something else, and it's difficult to turn it towards Krishna. When I think I'm angry, I think of person who made me angry. I cannot think of Krishna. I just think how bad he is, how dared he to do this to me. When I'm fearful, I'm thinking about the object of my fear, what I'm afraid of. When I'm depressed, I'm just thinking how unhappy I am. Basically, I'm just thinking about myself. In either case, I'm not thinking of Krishna. In the Bhagavatam, again we have description of the sacrifice performed by demigods, by different demigods, where Lord Shiva and Daksha were present. And if we remember, all exalted demigods, including Lord Brahma, were present there, and Daksha was coming to attend the sacrifice. So he was entering the sacrificial arena, and everybody except of two persons got up, except of Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, because in their position is higher than Daksha, who was a Prajapati, and who was also exalted personality. So everybody else, out of respect, they got up and offered obeisances to Daksha. But Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, they remained seated, because it was proper for them. But because Lord Shiva, he was Daksha's son-in-law, Daksha thought it's not appropriate for his son-in-law not to offer obeisances to father-in-law. So he felt offended. And he openly declared how Lord Shiva is abominable and how he doesn't know the proper culture and etiquette. And he basically started criticizing Lord Shiva in front of everybody. And then he cursed him not to have his part in the sacrifice. When all demigods get their parts in the sacrifice, Lord Shiva doesn't get his one, due to curse of Daksha. And in this angry mood, he left the sacrificial arena, although everybody told him, stop, don't go. And everybody also became affected by this anger, and then cursing and counter-cursing started. So we can see how destructive anger is. And what happened? Lord Shiva didn't do anything to him. He just didn't offer him respect by getting up. And what was the result? We know later that the great fight ensued, that the Lord Shiva's wife Sati, she left the body, and then Lord Shiva's associates, they came and they destroyed the sacrificial arena and they killed Daksha. And so the result of his becoming angry was that he was killed. And then in the next life, he got a new body with a goat's head. This is all a result of this uncontrolled anger. And it's not that he was anybody. He was a very exalted personality. He was a Prajapati, one of the progenitors of the universe from whom all other living entities came. And although he was so exalted personality, he degraded himself due to this uncontrolled emotion, due to his anger and feeling of not being respected, feeling of disrespect and being offended. So these material emotions, these negative emotions, they make the mind and the heart shrink. Mind and the heart, they are compared to the lotus, and we know the lotus sometimes opens when we are in the good mood, when the positive feelings in the heart, the mind and heart becomes open. But when there are negative emotions, when we are experiencing negative emotions, they shrink, they close up. And since the mind is connected to the brain follows the mind. Brain is producing hormones that cause certain chemical reactions in the body. The muscle starts contracting. There is a tension. When you feel some muscle tension, which is lasting for a long time in certain part of a body, that means that there is some negative feeling lodged in these muscles. And then other chemical reactions happen. Blood starts circulating slower or faster, heart starts beating, breathing pattern changes. So all these changes in the body happen in accordance to the state of the mind and the corresponding material emotions that we are experiencing. And if one is experiencing particular type of emotion for a very long time, continuously, day after day, weeks after weeks, month after month, on a regular basis, you become angry or fearful or something else, this will create disbalance and disease in the material body. Ulcers, coronary heart diseases, cancers, they in good part contributed to the stress and these negative emotions experienced. It is said that the stress or psychosomatic disorders that have origin in the mental disturbance, they account nowadays to 75% of all doctors' visits, according to some statistics. Just gives us the idea how important our emotional state is to our mental, physical, and ultimately spiritual health. So who is the responsible for this? You can say, oh, it's not just my karma to be angry. Yeah, you can say it's your karma because you have these samskaras that are deeply embedded in your chitta, in your subconscious mind. Because in the past, in previous lives, you also reacted in an angry manner to certain situations. And now when something similar happens, these samskaras are triggered, and again you react in an angry manner, or whatever the pattern or samskara is. But still, in spite of it being our karma, it's being automatic mechanical reactions that is conditioned by the past, still we have a freedom to choose how to react. In other ways, we are responsible for our emotional reactions, and we cannot blame anybody else. We have a free will to choose how to react. And if we follow these pushings of the samskaras to react negatively, it will produce bad emotions and bad mood, and we are harming ourselves physically, mentally, and spiritually also, because we are disturbed and we cannot practice any proper spiritual sadhana with a disturbed mind. We are told just to chant Hare Krishna and be happy. So some people think, yeah, if I chant Hare Krishna, I'll become happy, which is true. But being happy doesn't only mean that it's only a result of your chanting. It means also that you should be in a happy state of mind while you're chanting in order to be able to chant properly. If you're in the disturbed state of the mind, you cannot chant properly. And then you cannot become happy by this chanting. It will be just namaparada, distracted, inattentive chanting. How that chanting will produce happiness? So somehow we have to tackle these moods, negative emotions, in order to properly practice. Again, in Bhagavatam, we have an example of King Chitraketu, who desired to get a son, but somehow couldn't get it, although he had millions of wives. But eventually Parvata Muni came and he gave him a mantra, he gave him a process to perform yagya in order to get the son. So he got the son and he was jubilant, he was so happy that he couldn't control that happiness, and he was also very much attached to that son. But then, when the other queens who were not the mother of that child, when they poisoned him and the child died, the pain that was felt by King Chitraketu was unbearable. It was heart-wrenching. It was made him completely mad. And in that state, he couldn't do anything. So that's why when Parvata Muni came, he had to bring Narada Muni. He had to bring the dead son back to life in order to pacify King Chitraketu, in order to give him spiritual instructions. Otherwise, in that disturbed state, being disturbed by the loss of the son, he couldn't hear anything. So he had to bring that son back, and then when the son spoke, somehow King Chitraketu and other residents of the palace, they became pacified, and they were receptive to the spiritual instructions given by Narada Muni. So we all know that the proper mood for chanting is Trinadapi Sunichena, the mood of humility, and that means that we are not blaming anybody else for whatever happens to us. We accept it as our karma, humbly, and we are also not becoming depressed because we are taking shelter of Krishna. So chanting the bhakti, they will definitely purify our heart from all detrimental emotions, but we also have to take care to be in a proper state of consciousness, state of mind, and to have appropriate emotional state in order to practice bhakti properly and give chanting a chance to purify our heart. So we are in the control of our emotions if we want to be. So how we tackle these negative emotions when they come and appear and disturb our material and spiritual life? There are different ways and techniques. I'll give one suggestion. On the broad spectrum of emotions, we have exalted spiritual emotions on one side, and then on the other hand, we have base material emotions like anger, lust, and greed. So what is in between, kind of in the middle point? There is one emotion which is just on the borderline between spiritual and material emotions. I would suggest it's called gratitude. Becoming grateful, feeling grateful for whatever we are experiencing. So we all put in a conditional life because of our desire to enjoy and control and constantly experience miseries. But when we recognize that we are responsible, then we are not going to blame anybody else. It's because of our previous actions that we are experiencing the present tribulations. And then the reasons to become angry, to become resentful, and the reasons for all other bad material emotions, they disappear. And then when we realize that in spite of our bad actions in the past, God or Krishna is still merciful to us, that He still loves us, and then He gives us a chance to spiritually develop ourselves and go back to Him, then naturally we have to become grateful to Krishna. And not only to Krishna, but to everybody who comes our way and who is instrument in Krishna's hands, instrument of our karma also. It's a famous story when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he heard about the death of one of his critics who criticized him very heavily throughout his lifetime. You would think, oh, he became happy. Oh, my critic is finished. He got the result of his past misdeeds. But no, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he cried And he said he was my true friend. Because he was criticizing him, he was helping me to be in the proper state of mind. So he was grateful to even to that envious person, he was grateful. So we can be grateful not only to our well-wishers, friends and Krishna, but we can be grateful also to our enemies, because they are teaching us a lesson. So this attitude of gratitude for everything that happens to us, whether good or bad, has power to erase all negative material emotions that we nurtured for lifetimes, all anger, fear, lamentation, greed, hatred. And then, when we learn how to become grateful on a daily basis for everything that happens to us, for everything that Krishna gives us to different persons, then our mind will become peaceful. The negative emotions will go away, will fade away, and then we'll be able to focus properly with chanting and performing a devotional service. And then this chanting will purify our heart. And then one day we'll be able to experience the exalted spiritual emotions or love of God. So I think I'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, you can ask.
Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Yeah. Prabhu, thank you very much for this wonderful class. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also said that you beat your mind with broom in the morning and in shoes in the night. I hope it's correct what I'm saying. So, with all these emotions, how do you fit in that instruction of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur?
Yes, this instruction, beat your mind with a shoe, it's an analogy. It's not that literally you take a shoe and beat yourself on the head. It means that we are supposed to control the mind, not to allow any wild thoughts or emotions to overtake us. So the question is how do you control it? Actually, you cannot control it by force. If you're forcing your mind to do something and you are clenching your fists and your teeth, you can do it for some time, but sooner or later you'll be defeated because the mind will be stronger. So it has to be done tactfully. And Krishna, again in 11th canto, he gives the instruction how to do it. He compares the mind with the horse, and the person with the rider, who sometimes pulls the reins of the horse and sometimes let it run a little freely, and then again gradually pulls it. But he observes. The main point that he just observes how the horse is behaving, and then accordingly he pulls a little bit, sometimes he loosens, relaxes a little bit. So in the similar way we have to deal with the mind, to observe it and not to identify ourselves with it. Once you become identified with the mind and try to control it by force, you'll be defeated sooner or later. So the main point that we have to understand that we are different than the mind, to take the standpoint of observer and just observe. Okay, now this feeling of anger appeared, so you have to become conscious of it. Otherwise, if you're not conscious, the anger at the beginning, you might be able to curb it down and to suppress it, to push it back. But if you don't notice it in the beginning, it will overcome. It becomes so strong that you won't be able to control it. You'll just have to explode. But if you are conscious and you observe, okay, this is some emotion now appearing on the surface of the mind, but I'm not this emotion, I'm not this mind. So I just observe it. And as soon as you start observing it, it will lose its strength. You will understand it's not me. It is just something appearing on the surface of the mind. So in this way you'll be able to control it. Not just by investing physical force and beating yourself artificially. It's a combination. Sometimes you restrain it gently. Sometimes you see the devotees chanting like this and you see how they're struggling physically, but it's not really going to work like this. You have to be relaxed. Meditation means that the mind is relaxed and peaceful. If it's tense, if the body is tense, if the mind is tense, that means that you are putting too much force, and sooner or later you will lose control. So appropriate amount of force has to be put. But you have to observe, to be conscious, what are you doing? Mindful, but they call it mindful. Prabhupada said, become first conscious, then Krishna conscious. If you are not conscious, if you are not aware what's going on through the mind, you have no chance of controlling it. But once you become conscious, and you distance yourself from it, and it says, it's not me, it's just some material emotions passing, some thoughts passing through my mind, and I'm a soul, I'm an observer, I don't identify with it, then it's easy to control. You just let it pass. It will come 1 second, next second it will disappear because you properly identified it as different from you. But when we are putting this force, we are identifying with the body, with the mind, with the ego, and we're trying to control it, it's not going to work. Is that okay? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dandavat pranam. Prabhu, as you said, that sense of gratitude is the middle point and is like a cherry on the cake. But it doesn't come automatically to our mind because mind always revolts and rebels. So how to cultivate this sense of gratitude, Prabhuji? Please give some tips.
Yes, it's not going to come naturally because we are habituated to negative reactions. So we have to cultivate it consciously. So there are different techniques. In the morning, maybe you can take 5 minutes, or in the evening, and try to remember all things that we have to be grateful for during the day. And consciously meditate what we should be grateful for. Like this, you have to think about it, and when the particular situation comes and you feel the urge to react negatively, you have to stop for a moment and tell yourself, okay, let me see, is there anything that I should be grateful in this situation for? So it requires some effort, some practice, some cultivation. It will not happen automatically. So we have to cultivate it regularly, just to think what should we be grateful for, to remember it, and to be genuinely grateful to Krishna for whatever experience we are having at the moment. And then this will have ability to control the negative reactions. It's 9 o'clock, we have to stop. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki